fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again. We're talking about shrimp lures versus paddle-tail lures. We got Luke, Richard, Justin. Luke, I like the haircut, dude. Would you go in and say, "Give me your best pixie cut"? Is that what you guys?
You know, it's just got a little bit more aerodynamic. You know, I knew it was getting too long when I'm out fishing with the hat on, and the hair is still blowing around in my face. So, just got to do what you got to do.
Well,
but it was interesting. As they got longer, my fish catching got better and better. So I'm like actually a little bit nervous to go out next time with the shorter hair. It's probably like having bananas, right? Like might as well just.
Now's our time to shine. Luke
I mean, there's great YouTube videos on how to French braid your hair. So I just let it keep going. And
no braiding, no man buns. It's just a hat.
Nice bun. It's a mon bun. All right, I digress. So, we did a webinar here recently, and it was talking about 3 lures, and you probably can guess some of the ones that we mentioned in this webinar that just outfish like pretty consistently in live bait. And a lot of it's because of time, right? Given the same amount of time, if you only had 2 hours of fish, I'd rather go out and fish with lures versus spending an hour trying to get live bait and all the stuff that goes along with that, from making sure you've got chum and you can find the bait and you got a good working live well, etc. And so we got some questions from that, like, well, hey, like, you guys didn't really talk about shrimp, and what's crazy is Power Prawn is now outselling Slam Shady. So Power Prawn is our fastest selling lure over at fishstrong.com, and that sucker catches some big fish. But it's not something you're going to use all the time, right? And I think it can be a little bit tougher too. It's a little bit more advanced, right? You're not going to tell someone their very first time going out there trying to catch a trout. And we're going to talk about species specific. We're going to talk about depth. We're going to talk about structure specific, like, what types of structure you would want to use a shrimp over a paddle-tail and vice versa. But it's not something you want to give a brand new person because it's a little bit more advanced. But then again, it's not that hard to use. And man, that sucker just keeps catching big fish. So we want to jump on a podcast and talk about that. Talk about, all right, so you will instantaneously know when I should be going for an artificial shrimp like Power Prawn, and also when you should be going to a Slam Shady, let's just say, in a 3.5, 4, or even 5 inch. So who wants to kick it off? What do you, we got structure, we got even speed, if you're power fishing versus in a targeted area. We got depth. What do you guys think? What comes first?
I'll start off too, just because in that discussion where we had 3 lures, we didn't say a shrimp lure per se, but that we did mention the leprechaun, which is I'm showing it for those listening. It's a split-tail jerkbait, and when doing the double twitch retrieve method that we recommend, it really mimics it. Although it doesn't look like a shrimp, the action of the water, like the action it has in the water, very closely resembles a scared shrimp that darts up off the bottom and then slowly flutters down. This is a split tail jerk shad with a little on a weighted hook. And so this basically mimics both the scared shrimp and even injured bait fish. That's why we included it in the main 3, and it's much easier to rig, all that. And then what Joe mentioned on the Power Prawn, which is this big guy here. This does catch bigger. My average fish size has increased since using these, but as Joe mentioned, it's more advanced. Particularly this particular one, where this is made in Brazil. The material is very tough. It'll last longer, but it's much, much harder to rig. So this is not something I would ever recommend for somebody brand new who's not like very accustomed to rigging baits. We're going to make both rigging and everything else easier in the near future, seeing how effective this has been. But for now, this is like for more of like I would say intermediate to advanced fishermen. Just wanted to make sure that was clear up front.
Yep. Good. Justin?
There's so much to talk about with this. Offline, it's kind of like this big web that we're trying to narrow down when you're going to throw what. if we can try to make it into a science, right, of when you want to throw a paddle tail versus a shrimp lure. For me, if we were to take it into different categories, I would say water clarity and substrate or structure, whether it's sand or it's mud or oysters or grass, is going to determine whether I throw one or the other. I generally, if I had to pick between one of the two for different situations, if I'm fishing in really clear water, and most of the time, 4 out of 5 of the times that I go inshore fishing, I like sight fishing. I like watching the behavior of the fish that I'm trying to catch. So whether that's trout, snook, or redfish, I can see their every move. I can watch their behavior. I can determine whether I want to play a cat and mouse game with that fish, or whether they're on the move and they're ready to chase down bait against a shoreline. And that kind of determines whether I'm going to have a slower presentation or I'm going to have a bait fish presentation. It's going to be a little more erratic. It's going to give off a little more vibration. But to be really, really specific, something that I've had a lot of great success with this year on the Power Prawn is 2 different situations. So I have one on a jig head and one rigged weedless. And a lot of times, just for a quick hookup, I'll throw the weedless option, if that'll focus, might not, or I'm sorry, the jig head option. And I'll throw this over sand when it's crystal clear. And the challenge that I've had is I'll find a big snook or I'll find a big trout, a redfish. And if they are sitting still and they're over like maybe a little trough or like a little, kind of like a dust bowl, I don't even really know what to call it. There's no structure around that they're orienting themselves to, and they're just kind of sitting there. It can be really, really tough to get these fish to bite because if you work a paddle tail by them or a jerkbait or something erratic, they get spooked by too much action. So in those situations, and especially with the prawn kind of being a neutral color, it blends in with the sand really well. If you can just get this on the bottom and slowly glide it past them with like a faint pop, then you're getting this instinctual response for them to pounce on it. So they don't really feel intimidated because a shrimp is nothing to be afraid of as long as it's not super aggressive and bouncing all over the place. You don't need to draw a lot of attention to yourself in clear water. But I can get these impulse bites with a power prawn that I can't get with any other lure. I mean, I'm sure I could, take a Slam Shoe 2.0 and drag it, but because of that tail thumping around, I guess I feel that it might be too much vibration in a clear water setting. So that's kind of unique where I feel like this is my go-to. And then for the weedless option here is when I'm over grass. So if I'm sight fishing redfish and trout and they're laid up around a pothole or they're nose down in the grass, this is my go-to because I can work it very slowly. Because a lot of these bait fish are not trying to, whether it's a shrimp or an actual bait fish, are not trying to scoot out of the grass and just take off full speed. They want to hide themselves from the predator. So I can slow down my presentation and just like with a scalpel, just like dissect the area, the dinner plate that these fish are going to feed in. Those are the 2 situations that I'll use, whether the junior or the original size. I tend to throw the original size if I'm going for bigger redfish and I just want a bigger meal, a better opportunity for the fish. But sand and grass, but both are clear water scenarios for me. Now, there's other times, Luke, that I know you throw prawns a lot around docks. Like that's probably, you always have that tied on when you're fishing docks. I haven't had a lot of chance to do that this year, but that's another time that I would think to throw the prawn, right?
Yeah, docks and reefs, like deep water structure. And again, just as Justin said, usually a little bit clear water. But even in murky water, so put on a bigger jig head. This is what I learned from one of our members, Marcos, who really introduced us to these shrimp in the first place. He uses a minimum of half-ounce jig heads, in many cases ounces. And although this doesn't have much vibration, like a paddle tail is great for like churned up water, like darker water, like where Richard fishes, because it gives off that vibration. And this really shrimp mold itself is very streamlined. But if you're thumping on the bottom, that attracts the fish. And so that's what I'm sure Richard's going to talk about. But for deeper water where there's a lot less light down there in the bottom, you basically thump it on the bottom, even on reefs. Like we were fishing these things in up to 80 feet of water, catching all sorts of species. It is shockingly effective. It's something I never would have thought of throwing a shrimp lure offshore, like or near shore reefs. But it's really about just getting that thump and then just that quick action. It's just an instinct bite, right? It's just like fish are programmed to take advantage of an easy prey, and shrimp are, kind of helpless down there. Once they spook off, and as it's slowing down, those fish just come up and hammer it, and good fish too.
So to kind of summarize that point, a time that you would almost always go power prawn or some type of shrimp lure over, let's just say a paddle tail like Slam Shady would be clearly offshore. If you're fishing in 50 feet of water and just vertical popping it, you're not going to put a 1/2 ounce jig head on Slam Shady. I mean, you could,
but for the offshore, it's usually more clear, so it's really not a water clarity thing. But these paddle tails, right? This big tail, it gives off vibration. It also gives water drag, and so to sink a big paddle tail in 50 feet of water is going to take a ton of time or a ton of weight. You'll need like 2 ounces of weight, and to get the same drop rate as like a 1/2 ounce on the power prawn, just because it's so streamlined. So for the offshore stuff, it's really about getting to the bottom. That's where the strike zone is. And so there, it's just get to the bottom. Whereas inshore, like if it's calm and clear, I'm not using paddle tails inshore because, as Justin mentioned, it's just too much vibration. It's not natural. It's like hearing like camping at night and like a little squirrel is walking on leaves. It sounds like it's a bear, right? Like it's same with fish. If it's super calm out, nothing naturally is making a bunch of ruckus. And except it's something big that doesn't care about getting found.
Is that why you wet your pants? We went camping last time. Were you peed in the tent?
You promised you wouldn't say that.
Squirrel.
There and now that you're out me on everything. But yeah, so it's just smart to think about the actual vibe. Like, is it unnaturally, right? The key is to present a good lure in front of the fish without spooking it. And as long as it's a good lure, they'll come up and they're not spooked, they'll come up and swipe it. Fish are less picky than a lot of people think. So it's really just getting like a good looking lure that has the right action, and they'll come up and smack it.
Cool. What you got, Richard?
Yeah, you're so right on that, especially, there's just so much to talk about with this topic. So I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of my thought process. And, I'm up here, in Northeast Florida, in Georgia and all as well. So there's a lot of just murky water. So whenever I'm fishing a new area, I'm always going to have, a paddle tail thrown on and a shrimp, but I kind of use them differently, and I really use that paddle tail, first to kind of locate those fish, because all I'm looking for is that one, maybe two aggressive fish to start with. And then I can really start to hone and dial in kind of what the trends are going to be for that area and that day. And that paddle tail, especially in some murky water, it's going to put off some vibration, and all you need sometimes is one aggressive fish. And then once you can kind of figure that out, that's when I really like to start going into, not necessarily I'm always sight fishing, where I am, unless it's real low tide. But, what I like to do is then switch over to a shrimp profile, because almost everything is going to eat a shrimp if presented right. And going into what you were saying too, Luke, with the weight, that is huge, especially you start talking about different species. So, one of the things I really like to do, if I'm going to be targeting redfish a little bit more, I'm probably going to look into doing a little bit more of a heavier jig or something like that. And you don't need a really fast presentation, for reds, especially like a low tide. So I'll put more of like a jig head on, especially like the power prawn. But, if it's for trout, one of my favorite things I've been doing recently is actually just putting on a regular, just weighted hook, like an 1/8 ounce, and letting it go with the current. Not hit the bottom, and almost a little bit of a dead stick type situation. And the trout cannot stand that, because it looks exactly like a shrimp is just getting washed away with the current. And man, they tear it up. And then kind of going into the jerkbait here that you're talking about, this is one of my favorite lures for using around high tide and like a lot of grass and stuff like that, because what you can do, this is just so narrow and streamlined. You can throw this weedless presentation into the grass and just really reel it slowly and kind of slide it through the grass. And that's exactly where, especially redfish, where they're at right there in that first 5 feet or so of grass. And this just comes slowly sliding by, no bumping or anything, and they will pick it up. They'll find it. And it's been awesome for high tide around here.
You got me excited on that drifting the shrimp idea, because in the wintertime, I'll take live shrimp and I'll drift bridges at night for bulls over in Titusville. And now you got me thinking, like, I got to really bump back that weight and just drift mid-water, super, super slow. I love that. Like not hopping it around, different technique than bouncing bottom, right? You're letting it go with the current and kind of just like the conveyor belt. That's really cool. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's almost that, technique that is used in fly fishing in a river, right? You want that dead drift that just looks natural. It's a little bit more advanced because you do have to have a little bit of slack in your line. So a lot of times, that's why I like the high vis yellow line. I can actually see the line move a little bit, and it works great. Docks as well, especially at night, because you don't want a real heavy presentation at night. You can throw it ahead of the lights or ahead of where that target zone is. By the time that, weight and lure gets there, it's probably right in the strike zone within 2 to 3 feet. So it's really effective.
And you're definitely more manly when you can go back and tell your friends you caught it on a shrimp or a power prawn versus a nymph.
Yep.
Oh, how'd you catch that one? Caught it on a little nymph. Yeah.
The 4/0 hook, man.
What's that one video at what's that funny guy's the fly fishing guy's name? Where he gets the 3 random people to take his course, and he's like, "Are you guys fly curious?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fly curious." It's hilarious.
That's a good one.
So let me get this straight. You catch it and then you release it.
You put it back in the water.
It's a classic. Yeah. And so also just so that, just for clarity too, as far as the choosing of one versus the other, water clarity is a big thing, the visibility spectrum. But also I almost think that what trumps that is just looking to see what sometimes fish are keyed in only on bait fish or only on shrimp. And so that's just one thing to keep in mind. Like lately, the big bomber has been my ticket. It's been awesome. The big paddle tail. And then all of a sudden a bunch of small little bait fish comes in and is starting to get washed in. And that's all they cared about. I was throwing the bomber through, like literally snooker feeding like jacks. And I would reel that bomber through there. They didn't care, right? Though it was bait fish, it was too big, right? And they were only keyed in on that one thing. And so when there's a lot of one thing in an area, you have to match it as close as you can. So if it's a bunch of bait fish, a paddle tail is going to be a ticket, or like the little nub lure. That this is what ended up working best that day because they were only keyed in on small bait fish. So I gave it a little double twitch, retrieve that mimicked the small bait fish. If you're seeing a bunch of shrimp skipping on the water and fish feeding on shrimp, even if the water's super murky, you want to throw a shrimp lure, right? Because they're keyed in on shrimp. But in most cases, those are like the 2 anomalies. It's like very rare when they're only keyed in on one thing. So in most cases, the majority of cases, what we talked about, where if it's murky, or if it's really not calm and clear, then paddle tails pretty much win. Because in most cases, if like I've cleaned a lot of fish over the years, in most cases I'll actually open up the stomach just to see what's in there, and it's very rare when it's just one thing, right? There's like sometimes there's crabs and bait fish, sometimes shrimp and bait fish. Then every once in a while you'll get one and there's like 10 bait fish in there where they're like totally keyed in on bait fish. So just definitely factor in the prey that you're seeing in the area. Like that kind of trumps everything else. But if you're not seeing anything in particular, then default to, okay, is it calm and clear? Yes. Okay. Let's make sure to use a finesse bait like a power prawn, or again, for more of a newbie, I would say the leprechaun. But then if it's murky or if it's really windy, then the default is a paddle tail. And then it's just a matter about selecting the right size. So I think that would be like the best, like the cheat sheet, if you will, for those selections.
And let's just say 3 feet or less of water. If you're using the power prawn, how are you rigging it?
I mean, it depends on if there's structure.
Yeah.
If there's structure on the bottom, then what Justin showed, the weedless rig, just because you want to be near the structure and you obviously don't want to get snagged right there.
So what jig or hook is that?
That's the custom one that we've had before, but I've done so on the original size. I like just a 4/0 1/8 ounce owner, one or twist lock. That's been a good substitute. I like the custom one just because they got the weight up front, so it tends to dive down nose first. But yeah, over grass, calm water, clear conditions, like that's always tied on. What about, I had a situation over this past weekend. I went to Ozello and the water was crystal clear and there's grass, but the wind was honking. It was like 15 to 20 mile an hour winds around certain areas. I could not get away with throwing the prawn because I could not sit still. And I definitely couldn't see the bottom or see, the orientation of how to present. And in that situation, like power fishing was really the way to go to cover a lot of water. So even if it is clear and even if it does have grass on it, that wind and the current whipping around all these points, could I drift a power prawn? Yes, I could. But in terms of covering more water more efficiently, the Slam Shady 2.0 on a jig head, I was bouncing that around and I got to like 22-inch redfish pretty quick, bouncing on bottom. And it just because I could get down to bottom a little bit faster with this method. If I wanted to pick it up and just paddle tail it right along the bottom and just get a little more vibration moving quickly, it looks like bait fish whipping around with the current. This ended up outproducing in that situation. So, I mean, yeah, you could really like tailor it down to all the specific scenarios. But in general, a good baseline for finesse, as Luke said, like Alabama leprechaun or prawn and calm clear, and then paddle tail and anything with slightly murky or windier conditions where you need to cover more water and you can't really dissect an area as well.
And then I'm going to throw in size of fish. We've been doing this for a while. We got 25, now almost 26,000 members. We got thousands of people posting members, insiders every single week inside of our community. And I see so many reports. There's definitely a trend where someone says, man, I had one of my best days ever for just fish catching. And they're usually using a paddle tail, right? They're covering a ton of ground. They're power fishing. They caught 11 species. Like, man, we had tight lines forever. But I'm seeing the PB, right? You see someone's title, it says, I got my PB flounder I saw over the weekend, got my PB best trout, PB snook, and it was all in the power prawn, which is really interesting. Not to say that there haven't been tons of personal bests with the Slam Shady paddle tail, but I've seen a ton of people saying, I just caught my biggest XYZ on the power prawn. What's that? That's a redfish you caught? Look at that camo, dude. That's all I'm noticing your outfit. Looks sharp.
Where's Justin?
biggest redfish on artificial was probably 42, 43 on the prawn. Like
43
that was,
incher.
That was when you first started using it too, wasn't it?
That was in the beginning. I was like, I'm gonna go try this thing out. And I came back, I'm like, hey guys, this works.
And you had a monster trout recently, right, on the power prawn.
Yeah. Again, over that scenario of just fishing crystal clear sand. And it was, it's tough to present to these fish. I mean, I've had it earlier this year too, where for those of you that know, if you find big trout and they're sitting over sand and they're laid up, they're some of the pickiest fish to get to eat. Like, you're going to spook more than you hook. But a combination of the power prawn, because it was more of a finesse approach with a little bit of Dr. Juice, which I did think
that's unfair. That's unfair.
I know. Yeah. Okay. Well, that'll like, you get anything to bite. Any 100-pound tarpon on the flats, they'll hit Dr. Juice on a lure. But I did get like a 25-inch trout, here we go, on the power prawn again, which was solid. That was a monster. Just laid up. It was probably 15, 20 feet from the Ginu, just sitting there, popped it once, it scooted away. I'm like, oh no, I spooked it. And then he made a 180-degree turn and then looked at it. I'm like, nobody move, don't breathe. And one quick lift and he hammered it. So I was like, okay, it was about finesse. I mean, if you could see these fish and you can see their behavior, if I had a paddle tail and there's that thump of the tail, maybe if it looked like it was, dying on the sand, you might pick it up. But I feel like that shrimp really sealed the deal. So it's a very technique specific lure, but it can award you some of your biggest catches. It's always one of my go-to sight fishing lures.
Yep. And in Rex, remember that was the first time we used it, Luke, with Marcos down near, Chuckalusky, way down. And we start going offshore. We're like, what are we doing? And he's like, drop it right here. And we're literally just like vertical dropping it on a half ounce or ounce. I don't even remember what it was. It was a big old jig head. And we're just popping it off the bottom. And I mean, when a 40-inch snook hits, it is like game on. And you're just getting these thumps. And then we're bringing up 40-inch snook on this power prawn. We were like blown away. And then we went and caught redfish, we caught trout, and we like monster fish. It's still unexplainable. But I think a lot of people are skeptical, and then they buy it and they're like, holy smokes, this thing absolutely works. But it doesn't work in all situations, which is the whole reason we're doing this podcast. What else, Richard? I thought you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah. So not to get too much in the weeds with situations, but going a little bit on the opposite spectrum of what Justin was seeing, where, you're sight fishing for a single fish, especially kind of where I'm at really all through the summer and spring. I mean, we have got so much bait everywhere you can walk on it. So sometimes it's pretty difficult to get your lure noticed. And one thing, you can do this on both of these lures, but throw a popping cork in front of these guys, and what's I've done before, especially if you've got two anglers, have one person with a paddle tail or bait fish imitation, have somebody else with the shrimp, and even do it at different depths. And man, you can really figure out quickly kind of what those fish are keyed in on. Because sometimes they're chasing it and you see a shrimp, you see mullet, menhaden, all of it, it's going to be everywhere. So that's a really good way to kind of get that instinctual bite to key in, on the lure that you're already throwing, but it might not get noticed unless you have that kind of pop or other feeding, sound next to it. So that's been something that I've done a lot through the spring and summer that's been really effective.
Yeah, and I would say, and just one thing to keep in mind, regardless of whether it's the paddle tail or the power prawn or like a split tail, like an Alabama leprechaun, is depth control. Depth control is crucial. That's why we do all of our lures without pre-rigging them. Because when you pre-rig, now you only have one depth range, and it's usually a pretty small depth range. That this one lure is only good for this one depth range. And what I found best for all three of those situations, regardless of which lure type, is to have some jig heads, right? Some have jig heads of different sizes. This is the open water. This is the max strike to hookup ratio, is a jig head with an open, right? The hook is exposed. And then for weedless nature, which is incredibly important, is to have some weighted hooks. That way you have a lure where the hook point is not exposed. Either it's laying up close to the lure, or it's, in this case, you actually embed the very tip of it. This is really where most of the strikes happen, because whether they're going after redfish, sea trout, snook, flounder, they're all ambush predators. They're all, in most cases, they're going to be holding next to structure. That's where they're most comfortable. That's where they do the most feeding. That's where they're the less spooky. I should say the least spooky. And so weedless is what I do most of the time, because I'm usually fishing tight to mangroves or fishing seagrass or docks. But then what Justin mentioned too, if you're on an open flat that has some like potholes, that's when the fish are really, really spooky. And in that case, you don't have to worry so much about getting stuck on structure. So you might as well use a jig head like what Justin's holding. That way, when you do get that strike, you're going to maximize your odds of landing it. So always think about depth control, and then the weedlessness or not weedlessness. And we actually have, for how important it is, in case you haven't seen it, we do have a cheat sheet for all of the lures, like all of our lures. And then for each size of each lure, what jig heads and which weighted hooks are best for each depth range. And so that's super helpful. So if you haven't yet checked it out, we'll put a link down below, or you can just go to like saltstern.com and use the little search bar at the top and just look for lure guide cheat sheet. If you do that search, you'll see it. But that is incredibly important. Yeah. So I always want to make sure to never, for many years, this is all I threw, right? This is like when I was doing tournaments, this is all I threw. I just still did good, but I could only fish in really shallow water with seagrass because that's what I was throwing. My results would have been a lot better had I been a little bit more open to fishing the inlets, right, in the summer, where those bigger fish are usually gravitating to there. I just didn't have a lure for it. I didn't have the depth control for it. So don't do that. And this is the same mistake I did. No telling how many more fish I would have been catching those tournaments.
Don't buy the pre-rigged shrimp.
Yeah.
I mean, DOA shrimp, they've worked forever, but their target market was kind of newbies, right? Hey, just give them a pre-rig one. It fished in this depth, but I think so many people make the mistake of now trying to use that same little small shrimp with a small weight on a 10-foot dock with current, and they're not catching anything. And it's not even close to hitting the bottom, right? I mean, and it's interesting. The more we've had some pretty big name pros on here and guides, and they're all like, yeah, why would I ever buy a pre-rigged anything? And same with the professional bass guys, right? I mean, they're sitting there doing all kinds of altercations to their rigs to get it just perfect for the right depth and the right type of structure. So it's very, very important, and definitely download that cheat sheet if you haven't already. It's super, super helpful. And we'll continue to add to it as well and make changes as we bring on new lures, et cetera. But one thing you probably won't see us bringing on is pre-rigged shrimp.
They're good for newbies. Like they are, like for newbies, they're great. But we have the fishing club, and even when newbies come on board, they're not newbies for very long at all, because it really goes through, all the details, the entire foundation. So that obviously includes rigging, because it's so important.
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely a need for it, but for once you get intermediate advanced, you'll find yourself using a lot less of them.
Yep. One other kind of cool tip in terms of a type of structure, and Justin, you kind of mentioned it with the sand, is beach fishing. That's something that Marcos had said in Brazil. I mean, that's big down there in South America. They're using these exact same shrimp on big jig heads. It's the one place for most beaches you don't have a ton of structure. You're going to get caught up in like in an inlet or a pass, and launching these things out there and popping it or dragging it along the bottom, letting it go along in the waves. And I mean, those guys catch those monster robalo. I mean, that's how we were down in Costa Rica, remember? And I mean, some of the biggest snook you've ever seen in your life are down there. And a lot of these guys are just using little fake plastic shrimp on a big old jig head and just making sure that sucker is hitting the bottom. And it's almost like you can't overdo it. I mean, I know at some point you can. You don't want a 10-ounce jig head on there, but you can go pretty heavy, and it's amazing how effective a shrimp lure like that is on the beach. Have you guys tried it here in Florida or anywhere in Carolina, Georgia?
Yeah, I was throwing even on the Gulf Coast. It was we had an onshore wind, so that, I mean, it wasn't like surfable waves or anything, but it was decent sized waves just getting churned up. And so I had the 1/2-ounce jig head with the bigger power prawn. It was just thumping on the bottom and caught some really nice snook. So they definitely, even though there was a lot of bait fish in the area, the power prawn got the job done. I think it just because it was right in their face. There was just, the water was churned up, and it's just a matter of kind of right spot, right time. Again, in most cases, if it's a good looking lure with good action, they'll take a swipe of it, even if it's a shrimp and they've been eating mostly bait fish or vice versa. Good lure in front of their face usually wins.
Especially got a little Dr. Juice on there.
Woo. Top secret. Oh, I've not tried to throw a prawn in front of a snook on the beach. We're gonna get some calm weather days here soon, and I've actually never tried to throw a snook presentation or a shrimp presentation to snook that I can see on the beach. I'd like to try that. I've been like a spoon or a paddle tail guy, but I think that might be the ticket, because I got to play cat and mouse with those fish all the time and like hop, 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 and like get him to chase it and react. But now that I can slow down and stay in that strike zone more, I think that's gonna be a good lure. I got to try it out.
Cool. Anything else, guys, before we wrap this up?
I'm gonna say if shrimp lures in particular, if you're looking at a bunch of options, you'll notice that ours don't have all the little legs and stuff sticking out. Like a lot of the newer ones, they look incredibly realistic, right? Like it's almost to the point where if you put the lure next to the real shrimp, they have the antenna sticking out, they have all the different legs and the count of the legs spot on. And I've tried them, and I have really been disappointed with how they do. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is that a lot of it is the action in the water. And in most cases, like a little shrimp, when they get scared, it's not like a slow move, like it's a dart. It's a quick dart. And when you have all those legs down there, it slows down the action of the water, of the lure. And so for that reason, that's why we took the legs out. And number two, the similar deal is when you have all those antennas sticking out of there, your casting distance plummets, absolutely plummets. And for Justin's area, my area too, where you're sight fishing in shallow water, the longer you can cast, the more of a chance, like it's really a total game changer as far as catching fish. And so just not having all that fluff, it's a big difference. Obviously, they don't care about the fluff, right? They're hitting a lure and there's a big hook sticking out of the top of it. And so they're not like, they don't have a magnifying glass. They're looking if it does it have good action. And as soon as they decide yes, they're pouncing, because the longer they wait, the lure, the bait, the live bait that they think it is gone. So they don't have
their meal.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of time to like sit there and analyze it. This is really like, if they see good looking motion from a decent ways off, they're going to go and hammer it. Like that balcony snook, right? The cast was definitely not perfect, but that snook probably went like 3 feet, and you can see it came up and just slammed that lure because I did like one little dart, and it decided that little split tail jerk shad was either a shrimp or a bait fish or something, and it just came up and smacked it. It didn't like come up close and look at it. It pounced on it. So
is that you that caught the snook from the balcony?
Yeah,
I recognize you.
Hair.
Oh yeah,
short hair at that time. somehow I caught it without the long hair. I mean, that was like the one catch that I haven't been able to trump with the longer hair, but
too funny. But yeah, I mean, take it from the Brazilians and all these really, really competitive anglers down in South America. That's all they use shrimp like that. They don't even use paddle tails that much. Like they are all into shrimp, and they've perfected it. And they've realized you don't have to have every little antenna. And in fact, it actually can hurt you. So this is what they use. I mean, it's super, super simple. And most of them aren't even segmented. Ours is got the segment, and we're looking at another mold that does not have the segmentation. It'll last a little bit longer, less likely to get bitten off or torn. And in that very first day that we used them, we used the mold without the segmentation on it. It was just one, I mean, kind of like the DOA or Berkeley shrimp, the gulp shrimp, and that probably is caught more fish, those two shrimp combined, than anything. And they don't look real at all. They look like just kind of little TRDs, little turds in the water.
Yeah, I think the segmentation attracts humans more than the fish. Yeah, because looking at obviously I've been doing a lot of tests on all this stuff because we just wanted to make sure, like, when we get something to put our name on it, we want it to be good. And it's looking at underwater footage on segmented versus non-segmented. I mean, there's no difference, because when you jerk it, right, even though the segmented tail moves every which way, like it's just a straight dart. Like when you hit it, it's gonna do like a little kick, but it does pretty much the same thing. It's not quite as fluid on the non-segmented, but it has a little bit longer, a longer little twitch without the segmentation, just because there's less water drag. So both of them work though.
Yeah. Maybe they'll come up with a shrimp that looks so real you can actually take the tail off and deturd it like you would a real pill and eat shrimp. It is crazy how realistic some of these things are. And they win some of these awards, and we're like, oh my gosh, has anyone ever caught a fish on that? No, why would we catch fish? It looks so good.
Yeah, I have one over here, but I got a live target one that it looks like a shrimp. It is insane. I still haven't caught anything with it. But it looks so good. You can't help but buy it. Like, it looks so good.
Yeah.
So I think that's a selling to a human out of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, cool, guys. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this answered some questions, because we've seen this come up a few times. You can get all of the lures we've talked about over at fishstrong.com. Fishstrong.com. And of course, Insider members, you get 20% off everything in the store. Got some really cool things coming down the pike. Is going to be good. And of course, if you haven't joined us yet in the club, join us. We've made it a complete no-brainer. Go to saltstrong.com. You see up at the top a place to come join the club. The only club that guarantees you will be catching more inshore saltwater fish in less time. That means more fish per cast, impressing your friends, wowing your loved ones. And heck, everyone's going to be looking up to you and saying, wow, how did he or she get so stinking good at catching fish? It's a good feeling, because we're in it. We've all been there. We've all had, just some horrible years, not just days, but years of struggle and frustration. That's why we created the club in the first place, is to give you everything that we wish was there, no matter where you are, right? Luke, you mentioned newbies don't stay newbies for long, and same with Weekend Warriors. We want you more consistent. We've had so many people now have gone to get their captain's license that are now making a living from this and putting other friends and family and complete strangers on fish, which I think is so cool. And now we've attracted many full-time fishing guys who just constantly want to get better and learn, and of course, save money on all your tackle. So if that sounds like you, definitely come join us at saltstrong.com. You see just a handful of our fishing coaches. Got a couple more going to be adding on here in the next few months. So stay tuned for some big news there. Otherwise, go over to saltstrong.com. And if you want to leave a comment, that's also the best place. In the fishing tips section, you will see this blog post. And at the very bottom, you can leave a question. It'll come to us, and we will be glad to answer it, because I'm sure we probably left some stuff off. So we covered a lot in a short amount of time. Anything else, guys? Nope. Crickets? Any funny jokes? Nothing.
Shrimp jokes? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we should. We need to have a joke thing at the end of it.
I think you're right.
Let's make that a policy. But end on a chuckle.
All right, Justin, that's your job.
What, jingle?
Well, yeah, you knew the jingle, but
jingle's a caution.
Oh yeah.
I'm ready to jingle. If we're ready to jingle,
let's bring it, dude.
I've been waiting for this. Okay. Simplicity, specialist. Listen, specialist.
Yes, that's it. And for those of you wondering what he's talking about, I'm talking about simplicity in your tackle selection and then becoming a specialist, right? Becoming really great at throwing a handful of lures, not 50, not like behind me. These are all lures that I've bought over the years and never even make it in the water anymore because you just don't need them. Become an expert, become a specialist. And that's another reason we keep talking about Slam Shady and Power Prawn and Alabama Leprechaun. It's because they just keep working and we've become specialists at them. And everyone on our entire team, this is what we personally use. And we're all catching more fish because of it. And I feel like every time that I get in a slump, it's because I'm trying way too many things. And you just like, oh, let's just go back to what works. So that is one more reason we talk about this stuff. It just flat out works. And there's something special to be said about being a specialist and keeping it simple. So thank you, Justin. Next time we will have a whole boatload full of jokes, all family-friendly jokes. So don't worry. Guys, we'll see you on the next episode. Great job. Peace. We out. Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. Find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fish in our souls to stay.